Yes, our next speaker is in-house from our project, Lars Nyre, and he will present some of the work that we are doing on the more technical side in this project. Lars Nyre, he is a professor in new media at our Department of Information Science and Media Studies, and he is in charge of this work package where we are doing some exploratory efforts to see how we can take advantage of computer vision and artificial intelligence and use this in the manipulation of images and how that can be applied in a constructive way in the news media. So please welcome Lars Nyre.
Yes, thank you. So the easy pitch here is that this is the solution to all the problems that you suggested that we have. And maybe it is a kind of a pitch, but it is a research project under development. It's called Prosopo. I will get into the details of this, but the name is the beginning of the project, and so this is going to be more like the return of the nerds, in a sense. An academic lecture, several text slides, trying to explain quite carefully what we are going to do so that you can also hold us to account for it to some extent. Well, I will try to explain what this Prosopo is and maybe find out how to pronounce it. Our connection to the Viz Media project. Go into the technology to some extent. It's difficult to explain, so maybe I will not be successful, but it has to do with how this works and how we can use the workings of the technology. And then, finally, I could say I would go into some detail about how we are actually going to do things in the project. Some of it we have already done and constructed, but some of it will be going on in this spring and for a long while, I guess. If there is time for questions, if I manage to end in a reasonable time, I would like to have advice about how to proceed. I'm sure there are opinions about this. Okay, Prosopo. It means face in Greek. That's a very suitable name for our project. But what it really is, in our case, it is a software service with certain clear capabilities. It's supposed to identify faces in any database or archive of photos or videos in the future. Is there a face in the image? I know there are many functionalities for this, but we are making it ourselves, and we are going to be in full control of all the ways that it works. Recognition. We want to recognize the faces of unique individuals in the images. So exactly whose face is it? What's the name of this person? Whatever that can be connected to the person. Clearly, it would be no fun, or maybe not even very controversial potential in it, if we could not manipulate these faces or these photos. So we want to manipulate the facial features of, let's start with public persons. So it means, what do we want the face to look like? Happy or sad, strange or interested or bored? So, it is a Viz Media project. What that basically means is we are all inspired by Astrid Gunnhild, as you can maybe have an idea of in the photographs over there. But it's a team effort with Astrid Gunnhild at the center, Bjørnar Tessem at the top, Lars Nyre on the right-hand side, Simen Karlsen, Joar Midtun. The two last ones, they are master students at our department, and the rest of us are professors, you know. It combines information science and media studies, which is an interesting thing to do. We tried to do this at our department for a decade or so. Interesting competences can go together. It is an RRI project, which is something we can say in our group because we've said it so many times. The rest of you may struggle. Responsible research and innovation. This means, in our case, that we find it a very responsible thing to do to explore the ethical implications of this type of technologies. Facial technologies, how can they be used in journalism? How can they be used in the media? But also always being aware of how far can you go, or what are simply the ethical aspects of doing this, and also then doing it in a responsible way, in a constructive way. So we will do several tests in a very straightforward research or scientific way. We will test these services that we are making and exploring with journalists and regular readers. So let me try to go into what is really the information scientist's expertise, but I have memorized the script here. Now, artificial intelligence, that's what governs this. We don't have to think about this really at all, most of us, but that's what's running all these strange things on Snapchat and these recognitions and so on. And the thing is that first generations of artificial intelligence applied very, let's say, rigid methods, where knowledge was represented by explicit logical rules about how things were connected. If something, then something else, in a very, let's say, machine-like way, mechanical way almost. It had its limits, clearly. So what has happened in the last 10, 15 years at least is, some of you have heard about neural networks. It simulates the workings of the human brain with layers of neurons that are then running around in our brain. And these, the ways that these connections are made can be simulated by computers, so that connections and their strengths, which I will not go into in great detail, but these features are learned by algorithms. So it moves beyond what is humanly possible, except that we are obviously capable of programming this so that it can work. But none of this is anything we can do with our eyes, and we cannot do it with a regular camera either. So we are beyond what you could say is the traditional way of representing information. Of course, this has been explored a long time, but we are, in a sense, at the forefront of always new sophistication levels, which is now then this thing about facial recognition, which is taking off due to the way that these things work. So this interests me a lot, I just have to say. So the way that technology works is so advanced that we cannot do any of it ourselves as humans, and that's the interesting thing. That's why there is something to explore here. So computers have a certain type of vision then. They can process information about the relative distances between facial features. And this is the information that is being used to recognize and to manipulate. So we have the image here. A face has distances between everything, really. You can pick and choose, but between the nose and the forehead, from one corner of your eye to the other corner of your eye, or the outer edges, if that's interesting. From the chin to the lip, any of these can be clearly monitored, registered, and manipulated or worked with through these neural networks. And these relative distances can then, in most cases, be enough to identify unique individuals, which is very interesting, which is what makes it run, really. So the technology front is very often in America, still. There is a huge library of services or functionalities that we are playing around with, or our two clever information science master students are playing around with. It's called OpenCV, and it is an open source computer vision and machine learning software library. It provides software for manipulation of still images and video images, or live images. Here we can see what they are doing. This is not new anymore. This is like what we can almost get on any Snapchat or whatever features nowadays, just because these services are being sort of spread through just a thing like OpenCV. So here we have the adorable Ted Cruz morphing slowly into Hillary Clinton on the opposite side of the political spectrum, which must have been fun for them to make. So we would definitely have loved to do this in a live video version, and we may be able to do so in the future, but we really know that's difficult. More hardcore challenges in doing so. But there's this project, Face to Face. It's an R&D project for live manipulation of video where the facial expressions are in focus. It's run at Stanford University, and I hope we can see an example now from this video.
We present a novel real-time facial reenactment method that works with any commodity webcam. Since our method only uses RGB data for both the source and target actor, we are able to manipulate YouTube videos in real time. Here we demonstrate our method in a live setup. On the right, a source actor is captured with a standard webcam. This input drives the animation of the face in the video shown on the monitor to the left.
It's very nice.
A significant difference to previous methods is the re-rendering of the mouth interior. To this end, we resynthesize the mouth interior of the target actor using video footage from the training sequence.
The funny thing here is not what she's saying, it's definitely the faces. Oi, nice. What you're seeing is then that obviously you have understood it, the test person's face is being morphed into the expressions of George Bush. Okay? So, we can't do exactly those things, although we really would like to. So we are going to do it in a slightly more sober way as a regular research project, which then has a research problem or a problemstilling, as many of you are struggling with every time there is an exam. We are also struggling with a problemstilling. The thing is that there is a norm stating that news photos and videos should not be manipulated, doctored, photoshopped, call it what you will. It's unethical. And so far as we have registered, this is still like this is an absolute norm, still. For example, The Guardian had a story about this poor journalist who was then award-winning photographer dumped for altering single Syria image. So he was dumped from the newspaper for changing one picture, which was to take away a camera that probably was very annoying and destroyed the authenticity or the innocence of the photograph. So he chopped away the camera. So we are starting from what we could call a zero hypothesis, null-hypothesen. Readers as well as producers of news will disapprove of news stories where this traditional norm is broken. That's sort of what we presume is the normal thing. And the Prosopo project tries to break the norm, or try to move beyond this norm. Still in a relatively responsible way, hopefully, but that is the purpose of the project, to test the limits of the norm. So, we are going to play around with several services. We'll see, we plan to have 4 different services, would ideally all be live video functional in the future. The 2 first ones we already have played around with a lot. Identify a person in a photo and receive newsworthy information. The second one, make a face unrecognizable based on average face anonymization. Difficult word. We'll see what this means as we go along here. We have 2 more services that we want to test out. These are not made at all yet. So, alter the features of a face based on quantitative inputs representing power, wealth, and other things. This can obviously be used for satire, like if the forehead of Donald Trump is as tall as his wealth, then he will look very intelligent. Or you can imagine all kinds of versions where you make faces according to facts. The fourth one It's very interesting. It's like altering the happiness, the grumpiness, the mood of all the faces in a given picture. For example, so that you switch towards very sad and gloomy right-wing politicians and very happy and smiling and joyful left-wing politicians in your newspaper, depending on on the bias of your newspaper or your website or whatever. So clearly some of these would be challenging. The last one is probably the most ethically challenging. Sort of everybody can just think about 5 problems without trying even. We'll see about that. So we have a real system being built. I will go into some more details here. This looks maybe a little confusing, but it's basically that at the top of the graph we have the services that we are constructing. They can then be, at least in theory, subscribed to by NRK, Viss Media itself in our version. Media City Bergen could probably get a discount price for this service. And the farthest one, it could be something like anybody, a regular person. And then all of these would make it available for users through an app. It could be on a website or it could be on a smartphone, obviously. And reach, you could see the arrows are quite complicated. So you have to imagine that media creators are using the app for its VG subscription to make a certain type of manipulations that will then be available for media consumers or readers. It could also be that a regular person just subscribes or whatever, how we do this in the future, to the service and makes their own more or less private manipulations of photos. It would probably be less journalistic if that was the case. Maybe not. In any event, this is like a medium. You could think about this as lots of elements that could create different types of media depending on the selection road through the system. So it's very flexible, and that also is a problem for us because we may not know how to test it in the best way, or which is a selection of manipulation features for which audience would be most interesting to test. So let's go into 2 of the services. Yeah, of course I have little time left. Find a person. So here you can imagine the context is you're walking around, or the service can first, I would like to say, the service can be used in any public surrounding by regular readers and journalists. If you're unethical as a person, you can of course use it wherever you want to. But it should ideally then be used in a specific setting where it's public. So you are in this New York street. I know Erna, but who the Farsken is this other person. I've never seen her before. So then this could happen to you in many different ways, and it could also be a journalist that has this problem, although we could presume that they know much more than the rest of us about who important people are. But still, unfortunately, many of us don't know this Norwegian climate minister. So we will then use the service, the Prosopo 1. We'll find a better name later on. So it just allows you to take a picture of the face or the several faces, but you push on the face that you are curious about, and newsworthy information about this person pops up for you and helps you to understand the situation. As I'm saying, it could be a journalist doing this for professional purposes, and it could obviously also be just anybody, if that was the way this went. Okay, that's, I would say, the least controversial, although obviously it has the dilemmas that we just heard about, because all our services has that by default. The next context, or the next service, is to anonymize a person. So the context is, the service is used by news providers when writing a story, and the result is seen by regular news readers. We could say that anybody could use any of our tools, but we would prefer to think about this as a more editorial software. I don't know how many football fans there are out here, but you will now be shocked because of this, this scenario. Mathieu Debuchy is arrested on a serious crime charge, and the news provider wants an anonymous current Arsenal player. That's the purpose here. You will you want to say that it's arsenal, you want to show a picture because all the news stories work better with pictures anyway. So, Principle 2 automatically creates an average, unrecognizable, but photorealistic face by combining all the arsenal players and manipulating their features into an average arsenal face. Let's look at the next video. So first we have the poor man who is going to be anonymized, and this is the result. This is the picture as it is presented in the newspaper. And now we will see a nice little transformation here. And now you should think about the neural networks. I advise you to think about how this now slowly is just twitched and tweaked by the algorithm into, I don't know exactly when we are at the average face, it will now return to the real single arsenal player face. There's lots to say about this. For example, it could have been used in the Snapchat story that we heard about earlier today with the rape victims as a way of presenting something more normal to look at, but still keeping the anonymity. We could imagine various ways that this has this photorealism while still anonymizing people. I would also like to suggest that if this was used in China, then it was an average Chinese man or an average Chinese woman. If it were children, it would be an average child face or average child girl face. Whatever it is, as long as we have enough photos, we can deal with an averageization of any type of persons in society. Yes. Testing the services. 5 minutes. So we plan to do the tests in Norway, which may sound obvious since we are in Norway, but the thing is that it means according to the ethical standards prevalent in our country. So this, like a Daily Mail, would have their views on this matter, and maybe the whole of the British society is now so used to the tabloid newspapers that went off their heels in the 1980s sometime and have never recovered from this extreme intrusion into people's lives, and celebrities first, but now also regular persons. So it means that we are relatively reasonable in this country, careful when it comes to these things in our country, and that's what we will relate to. If we were to test this in Finland or in the USA or so, we would have to rig the whole thing in a different way, or think about the ways that people will react in a different way. We will conduct tests with producers of news. That's very interesting to us. For example, the newsrooms of Bergen's or Aftenposten, or if this was a live service, we could definitely be very interested in testing it with NRK and TV2 and so on. You can imagine an interview study with photojournalists who have been sacked from their job almost for doing things that are far less dramatic than what we are suggesting to do, and see how they respond. You could think about the editors, how will they respond? Clearly, it's very interesting for us to conduct tests with readers of news on the phone then, in a real setting. So we don't want to put them into a laboratory where they are sitting in front of a computer. In that sense, we want them to be in a more regular user setting and test our services in this way. Here, it is wonderful for a person like myself as a humanist researcher to have several smart information scientists, because then we can make the survey tools or the tools for registering whatever we want in the app itself. So you're looking at our things and you're registering your responses in the same app. So we could, in theory, send it out to 10,000 people, and everything would be going on in the app itself. It's very tantalizing. But anyway, we will design a variety of tests to also have evaluations of a qualitative nature, as well as this quantitative, survey-like way of testing it. So, of course, we need to have real, emotional responses. We have discussed how people, for example, maybe react to the way that somebody is made to be a generalized anonymity, but it actually looks like John, his friend from Voss. And so if you know that it is an anonymous face, but it still looks very much like your friend from Voss, and then that may influence your response, so it doesn't really help that it officially doesn't, it's not him. It looks like him, and your response may be influenced by this fact. Lots of interesting problems going on there, at least if we stick with an emotional human response to such images. Yes, and like I'm suggesting, we want to have advice, maybe not, I don't know if this setting is the best, but we really want to have input about how to deal with this. Where are the limits as far as some of you think? How should we test it? What are the most interesting types of people, professions to test this on? So I guess that's it for me, and we'll see what this ends up with sometime in the future. Yes?
Any questions for Lars?
I brought my notebook. There's lots of room.
Any advice?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chris Black from VizRT, right here. Yeah. So if you had a photo with multiple people in there, like you had your team from, I think it was Arsenal, and you wanted to really focus on one person, but you wanted to anonymize the rest of the team, then you're going to have a number of anonymous people there that basically look exactly the same. Are you looking at different levels of anonymization for different people so you can have different faces within the same photo, even though they're all anonymous?
Very interesting question. You could think about the entertainment value of such an image would be very low if all the rest of them were the same. So that's one reason to stick to explore what you're saying. The ethical aspect is definitely challenging in this regard, and I can't say I have an answer to the extent that this was a question, but I would say that we have multiple faces. Maybe one or two of them are at the center of the anonymization work, while others are less controversial. But they would also be drawn into the situation that may then be very problematic and might like it better if they were also anonymized. So I see there is a big dilemma there. The more faces, the more issues. But if that was not an answer, you could follow up. Mm.
Hereditarily Norwegian,
Yes.
then they're going to have a similar look no matter what you do with the anonymizer.
Yes. Just to follow up on that, you could imagine, let's say, at least in some countries, a drone video of a big demonstration where the police could study this drone video in great detail and find out who to arrest. So if you had a live version of this service, it would require some computer power, but then you would anonymize all the little faces down there. And it may not be as important as in other cases, because the main purpose then is just to make them into a big anonymous crowd that protests the injustices that they have been met with, which would be a very nice, let's say, democratic feature, if it, except if there are things here that I haven't thought about, which there must be. Yeah, good.